Hey everyone, RogueGold here. Got a bit of a different video for you today, which was sparked by some news outside of the Division sphere. However, for me, it's brought up a very interesting question of if our franchise might be headed towards a similar fate. What I'm referring to is the news with Destiny and Bungie that's been dominating internet news feeds over the past few weeks. Now, no, before the doom and gloomers, who for some reason continue to watch these videos despite clearly not enjoying the game, come out of the woodwork to say, I told you so. This video is not me saying that I think live services are dead or that the Division is heading towards its end, as I've seen some conclude off of this news. I think we've got a bright future ahead of us with the Division 3 and more on the horizon. However, I think there are some very interesting parallels to be drawn between what this reporting for Destiny has revealed, namely the fact that Bungie had several spin-offs and an expansion of the universe as a whole planned and in development before proceeding to scrap it all, and with the Division, which as most of you likely know, had its first major spin-off canceled just a few months back with Heartland, and the mobile port of Resurgence just got bumped back yet another year in its projected release window. There's something afoot here, and I want to try and get to the bottom of it all. So, we'll jump right into it. If you end up enjoying the video, then as always a like would be most appreciated, and if you want to see more of my discussions and thoughts in the future, then I hope you'll consider sticking around by clicking that sub button. We are continually growing and would love to have you. But without further ado, let's go. Alright, so I think it's important to begin with at least a brief recap of what has gone down in the recent weeks with Bungie and Destiny for any who are unaware. Destiny is of course the golden child of live service. It's the first-person looter shooter that launched in 2014, and it and its sequel have continued to dominate player charts ever since. Now, Bungie is the game's developer, and they've had a rough stretch in the recent months and even years. That first became apparent in a big round of layoffs done towards the end of 2023, but then just the other week, yet another round was announced, laying off more than 200 people, then having an additional 150 or so, I think it was, move over to roles within Sony, who is Bungie's parent company. Now, the layoff news is what the most amount of people have been talking about, and I mean rightfully so. The state of the gaming industry right now is pretty tragic in terms of job security and just confidence overall. I mean, Bungie just put out one of the highest critically acclaimed Destiny releases ever with the Final Shape expansion, and even that couldn't stave off these layoffs. So my heart goes out to those let go, and it's unfortunately just a small drop in the ridiculously large bucket of layoffs that have been happening over the past 18 months across the industry. Let's hope things can start moving in a better direction. But back on track, some of the other big news to come from all of this Bungie turmoil was some reporting done on what was apparently an array of Destiny-specific projects and spin-offs that were pitched, seemingly prototyped, before getting scrapped at various phases of development. Now, before we look at the total picture here, the one important piece to cover first is Project Payback, as this was seemingly the spin-off that got furthest into development, that was the most actualized, and had even seemed to be teased to the Destiny community by the executive creative director of the entire IP, who is now no longer at the company after the layoffs. More on that in a bit. But courtesy of Jason Schreier, I will link his article in the description below for you to check out if you'd like to. This is the gist of what Codename Payback was set to be. One of Bungie's big bets was Payback, an incubation project set in the Destiny universe that would shake up the formula in major ways according to people familiar. It would pivot from a first-person to a third-person perspective and allow players to use the franchise's characters to explore a large world while cooperating to battle monsters and solve puzzles. The pitch took elements from popular games such as Warframe and Genshin Impact. Okay, so one of the first parallels that I want to draw here, although it's not a direct comparison absolutely, but Payback very much seemed to fit the spin-off definition. Same universe, same characters from Destiny that players know, except it's changing genres by fully focusing on the co-op and exploration side of things, and they're injecting a few big new elements like the shift from first to third person and seemingly having players embody these established characters from the lore instead of creating their own. Now shifting to the Division franchise, we of course had Heartland, a very true-to-form spin-off, using the same world, lore, and overall mechanics, but taking on an all-new genre in it being more survival and extraction-based. It added new movement options with crouching and sliding, and like Payback was making the shift to preset characters instead of custom ones. And what do you know, both of these first big spin-off concepts and projects for both of these financially successful live service IPs were cancelled. They never made it to market. So that's an interesting parallel in my view, but it goes even deeper. Now, having the context of what Payback was going to be, let's look at what the larger plans for the Destiny universe seem to have been prior to Bungie's financial struggles. This comes courtesy of reporting by Paul Tassi from Forbes. Once again, the link is in the description if you're curious to see the full thing. In the article, he states, Destiny 3 was and is considered too big of a risk in the current market. The idea was instead to split up Destiny as an IP into into more manageable components. The PvE portion we have now continuing in Destiny 2, payback for an adventure genre expansion, a mobile Destiny game coming from NetEase, and spinning out a separate 3v3 Crucible game channeling Trials. And the one thing I wanted to just clarify before we dissect this, for anyone not totally familiar with Destiny and its jargon, what he's referring to with that last bit is PvP. Crucible is Destiny's umbrella term for PvP modes, just like The Division 2 has conflict, and Trials specifically is a hallmark PvP experience within that franchise that's historically focused on competitive, high-intensity 3v3 elimination gameplay. So this overall concept, as Paul mentions, about splitting the IP up into these different components is what I really want to focus on here, because it's actually not that dissimilar, I think, from what we've seen the Division heading towards. I mean, think about it. Division 2 has leaned more and more into focusing on PvE only. They still make adjustments and improvements to PvP, but there hasn't been any actual new PvP content since TU6 way back in 2019, when Red Storm Entertainment, who used to handle all of the PvP stuff, was moved over to begin working on Heartland. And speaking of Heartland, that kind of fills two roles if you're comparing this to the Destiny blueprint. It's both that genre expansion, putting out a non-looter shooter Division title, but it also fits that role of spinning out PvP into its own experience, like Destiny was seemingly planning to do with that 3v3 project. Because although Ubisoft nor any of the studios have ever directly said this, it is essentially implied that because Red Storm were the ones working on Heartland, and because it was going to be this PvPvE experience, it was like, yeah, from here on out, if you want your true and balanced Division PvP fix, you play Heartland. And then, of course, both of these franchises seem to have wanted to pierce the mobile market, with Destiny reportedly pursuing a mobile version with NetEase. And then on the Division side, we of course have the Division Resurgence, which has not been cancelled as of yet, and I really do hope that it does release because I've played it, I put videos out on it here on the channel. I think it is a truly authentic representation of the Division on mobile devices. Open world, looter shooter, the whole deal. It's fun. However, while not being cancelled, it has continued to see strange delay after strange delay. First being committed to a launch in late 2023, they then said that they needed just a bit more time, so it got bumped to early 2024. Then they said that they, out of nowhere, got approval for release in China, so they wanted to change a few things and work on that so they could launch globally all at once. But then we heard recently that it's now not projected for this fiscal year, meaning that at the very earliest, it's now not coming until at least April of 2025. So I have hope that it will still come, but like we saw with Heartland, and like what happened to all of these never announced or shown Destiny projects, perhaps the writing is on the wall that it's just not meant to be. And that's really what I want to get at here. Why are these projects just seemingly doomed to fail? Which might sound cynical and sensationalized, but look, on paper, this should not be the case. Destiny has maintained a very strong and loyal player base for a decade now, topping charts, winning best ongoing game awards, etc. And on the Division side, Division 1 held the record for the highest selling new IP of all time for 6 years. The franchise has had over 40 million unique players. Division 2 quite literally rose out of the ashes, ironic given the Phoenix logo, after the game endured a 15-month content drought. I mean, both of these franchises have survived thick and thin, they've proven their staying power. Because of that, it makes logical sense for executives at these companies to broaden the IP's offerings, dabble in some spin-off ideas, retain and expand your audiences. And yet, at every turn so far, it just hasn't worked out. Why is that? I have one theory, a reason for why I think both developers and executives like the idea of compartmentalizing these franchises, but also why players don't. Firstly, from an executive perspective, one storefront, so for example Destiny 2 or The Division 2, compared to 3 or 4 storefronts, right? If you had that mainline game, but then also several spin-offs at its side, your revenue potential increases the more places there are to buy from. Wider possible audiences to be drawn in with all of these differing genres and platforms, and more chances to implement different monetization strategies. From a developer perspective, however, I think they too actually favor this idea, at least to a degree, but more for technical reasons. Now, we have gone through this over and over again about how difficult maintaining and updating games of these ages are with their complexities and variety of systems, but it makes it no less true. It's annoying to hear or think about it from a player perspective, so yeah, we try and ignore it and not think about it much, but there are countless credible stories and sources that you can go and find and read online about developers speaking on how tough it is day in and day out to keep these kinds of games going. Whether it's bug management, keeping server and online infrastructure running smoothly, or even just the feasibility of adding another location, another game mode, a new system, whatever it may be, on top of everything else the game already has. So I have no doubt that the idea of them removing a few few of those huge blocks, putting them onto their own foundations and rebuilding things that way, is an attractive idea, I'm sure. It would take a ton of strain out of their jobs, would probably allow them to focus more on creativity over technical problem solving, and that feeds directly into balancing as well. It's not an easy task to juggle all of these different modes and systems, PvE and PvP. I'm sure things would be hugely alleviated for them if they could separate each of those elements and continue developing them independently. But that leads me into the player perspective on this. Now, I can only speak from my own personal experience and my own preferences in gaming. I also know I've played with and spoken to many over time who feel the same way, so at the very least I speak for a small percentage of players here. We love the fact that all of these different experiences can be found within one game, one destination. I love the intersection between PvE and PvP, grinding endgame raids and fighting awesome bosses, earning an epic new weapon, and taking that straight into PvP. That's what hooked me on World of Warcraft, it's what hooked me on Destiny 1 after that, and The Division 1 after that. Many players love and play these games because of how vast they are, and how dynamic the kinds of content they offer are. And while I personally am more than okay with spin-off projects being attempted, I was all in on Heartland, as many of you know. Destiny's payback concept sounded super intriguing, I would have loved to see it. And I totally see the value in having these franchises available on mobile, reaching wider audiences. I'm only in support of these ideas as complements to the mainline core IP experience. I want them to build these universes out from the foundation of the core game, not as a way to replace its content variety and vastness. And so this leads us to the final point that I want to touch on here. As fans of The Division, which course are we on? Will these experiences continue to be split up, pitting the hopes of an easier technical landscape against this curse that these spin-off projects seem to have? Or is it possible that there's yet another path to be taken? This entire video, we've covered the striking similarities between Destiny and The Division's plans, but the one big diversion is what's happening moving forward. As made clear in the reporting, Bungie has no plans to pursue a Destiny 3 at this time. They deem it too risky, and they just don't have the resources to pull it off alongside continuing to support Destiny 2 and developing their new marathon game. Partially because of this, I'm sure, included in the recent layoffs were Luke Smith and Mark Noseworthy, the executive creative director and the vice president of the Destiny IP, respectively. These two guys had been with Destiny since its conception, and their departure truly brings into question what big future plans the franchise will chart. Comparatively, The Division has had a bit of a different trajectory laid out. Ubisoft and Massive have publicly committed to making a Division 3, as was announced last year. And on top of that, we have our first ever central IP leader coming onto the team in literally just weeks from now with Julian Garrity. He was the associate creative director on The Division 1, creative director on The Division 2, stepped away for a few years to develop Star Wars Outlaws. But once that game releases at the end of this month, it's been announced that he's returning as executive producer of the entire Division franchise, overseeing development on The Division 3, as well as guiding and bringing cohesion to the entire brand moving forward. Now, please don't misinterpret me, I don't bring any of this up with the goal of attacking or diminishing the Destiny IP. I deeply adore Destiny, I played it before I even knew what The Division was, and Destiny 1 remains my second favorite game of all time, right behind The Division 1. I truly hope Bungie can get its feet under itself again in the years to come. I would love to jump back into that franchise with a third game entry, but for now we can only go off of what we know. And centering back on The Division to close this out, despite the rocks in the road that we've had with these spin-offs and everything else, Division 3 is coming. We have a central figure and vision guiding everything moving forward. Now that doesn't guarantee anything. Game development is hard, and in the years it's going to take them to construct this third title, anything could happen. However, in a time with so much hesitation to go big from many of these publishers, I feel that excitement in my chest for the potential that The Division 3 could bring not just to us fans, but to the industry as a whole. As we covered, developing and maintaining these games isn't easy, and it's a monumental task to ask for them to bring that level of scale and quality that we expect. But if they can pull it off, if they're ready to dig in and do the hard work, The Division 3 could prove once and for all that the curse that these games seem to carry doesn't have to shackle them. And it could truly serve as that cornerstone for them to then build out and expand this universe to spin-offs of different genres, to transmedia things like film, animation, written adaptations. The sky's the limit, and at the end of the day, all I can do is hope for the best, and I'm just excited to see where things go from here. That is going to do it for me on this one, everybody. I sincerely hope you enjoyed. Do let me know any and all thoughts or reactions you may have after seeing everything presented in the video. What's your take on the Destiny Bungie news? How do you view some of those parallels to The Division? And what do you think The Division 3 has the potential to really do? Any and everything, leave it below. I very much look forward to reading through it. Appreciate you all watching as always, and until next time, RogueGold. Out.